Adrian West had never expected his life to change, especially not on a distant alien planet. He was just an ordinary mechanic from Earth, living a quiet life with no plans for adventure or fame. That is, until one fateful day when his entire world turned upside down. It all began with a malfunctioning shuttle. Adrian had been working on a small transport ship in the repair bay when a sudden blast shook the walls. His first instinct was to dive under cover, his heart racing with the sound of alarms blaring around him. The ship, which was meant to transport high-ranking Verax officials, had just exploded mid-flight. What should have been a routine job had gone terribly wrong. Adrian, never one to shy away from challenges, immediately went to work, salvaging what he could. As the debris settled, he realized this wasn't just another accident. The explosion had thrown his ship into the middle of something much bigger, a high-profile intergalactic competition. He had been accidentally enrolled in an ancient and prestigious tournament, one that many thought was just a legend. A competition held once every 100 years to select a human who would win the honor of marrying a member of the royal Verax family. To Adrian, this sounded like a joke, a bizarre misunderstanding that could never be real. But as he looked around at the other participants, his doubt turned into realization. This was no joke. The rules were simple, or so it seemed. Contestants from various species were chosen based on their skills, wit, and charm. Each of them had been chosen as a potential husband for a member of the Verax royal family. A prize, an honor, but also a perilous game of politics where the highest bidder often won. However, Adrian was not like the other contestants. He wasn't skilled in combat or manipulation. He wasn't rich or well-connected. He was just a mechanic from Earth with no interest in politics or royalty. Yet there he was, standing at the edge of an enormous arena, surrounded by the strangest beings he had ever seen. The alien contestants, towering figures from various planets, were all much stronger, faster, and smarter than any human could be. Adrian felt a pang of fear, but he couldn't turn back. He had been thrust into this competition by mistake, and there was no way to get out of it. The other competitors were merciless. They looked at Adrian as if he were an amusing toy, something to be knocked out of the game with little effort. They mocked his simple clothes and his nervous demeanor. They laughed at his lack of combat skills and his awkwardness. Adrian could feel the weight of their judgment, but he did not let it break him. He had one advantage they didn't have. He was human. Over the next few days, Adrian's ability to think on his feet, his cleverness, and his willingness to fight for what he wanted began to shine through. He wasn't the fastest, and he certainly wasn't the strongest, but his resourcefulness set him apart. Whether it was outsmarting a competitor in a strategy game or finding a way to bypass an obstacle that seemed impossible to cross, Adrian found himself slowly making his way through the rounds. The Verax judges, towering beings with smooth purple skin and golden eyes, watched with intense focus. They saw Adrian as nothing more than an oddity, a curious human who didn't belong in the competition. But they also couldn't deny that he was performing well, much better than anyone had expected. Adrian could see the skepticism in their eyes, but he didn't care. He was here to win, no matter what. Then came the day of the final challenge. Adrian's heart raced as he stood in the center of a vast arena, surrounded by the last of the competitors. He had made it this far against all odds, and now it was time to prove that he belonged here. The challenge was simple, at least on the surface, to win the heart of Lady Verla, a member of the royal Verax family. Lady Verla was nothing like Adrian had imagined. She was tall and elegant, with deep violet eyes that seemed to look straight through him. Her royal attire, shimmering with intricate designs, made her seem untouchable. Her presence in the arena was like a goddess descending from the heavens, commanding attention with every step she took. The entire arena fell silent as she walked towards Adrian, her eyes never leaving his. Adrian tried to keep his cool, but his nerves were getting the better of him. He had never been in a situation like this, and the pressure was starting to overwhelm him. Lady Verla was his prize, his opponent, and the key to everything that had happened. Her family was one of the most powerful in the Verax Empire, and she had the power to shape the outcome of the entire competition. "I don't know why you're here." Verla's voice was cold and unfeeling. "You're a human, nothing more than a pawn in a game you don't understand. This competition is for the strong, the smart, the powerful. And you," she paused, her eyes scanning Adrian from head to toe, "you're nothing." Adrian swallowed hard, trying to ignore the sting of her words. She was right in a way. He didn't belong here, but what did he have to lose? He was just a mechanic from Earth, thrown into the most bizarre competition of his life. The prize? A woman he didn't know, a future he couldn't comprehend, and a galaxy that saw him as little more than a curiosity. Still, there was something in him that refused to give up. He had faced the impossible many times before. He had been a mechanic on a remote space station, fixing broken ships and salvaging old technology. He knew how to think, to adapt, to survive, and that's exactly what he planned to do here. With each passing round, Adrian found himself rising to the challenge. It wasn't about being the strongest or the most skilled. It was about understanding the rules of the game, finding the hidden patterns, and using them to his advantage. Adrian played with the strategies, adapting to the unpredictable nature of the competition. His mind worked like a well-oiled machine, finding solutions others didn't see. In the end, it wasn't brute force or tactics that won him the prize. It was his ability to think, to innovate, and to survive. The final challenge was a test of character, a challenge that could only be won by someone who truly understood the value of empathy, loyalty, and selflessness. Adrian, despite all the odds against him, managed to impress the judges with his unwavering resolve. He had earned his place in this strange, otherworldly game, but when the results were finally announced, Adrian was as shocked as anyone else. He had won. He was the one who would marry Lady Verla. It was a surreal moment. He stood there, surrounded by strange aliens, wondering how on earth he had gotten here. Adrian wasn't sure if he was ready for what lay ahead, but he had no choice. The competition was over, and now he had to face the consequences. Lady Verla's eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak, didn't react to the announcement. She simply turned away, leaving Adrian standing in the middle of the arena, trying to process what had just happened. As he watched her walk away, Adrian couldn't help but wonder what kind of future awaited him on this alien world. He had won, but at what cost? He was now tied to a woman he barely knew, in a galaxy full of politics, intrigue, and power struggles. It was clear that the real challenges were just beginning. Adrian had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. His life would never be the same again. Adrian's life had taken a turn he never could have predicted. Days ago, he was a simple mechanic working on repairs for intergalactic ships. Now, he was a human in the midst of the Verax Empire, married to Lady Verla, the proud member of the royal family. But there was something much bigger than his unexpected marriage, something far more dangerous. Adrian quickly realized that being the chosen one wasn't as glamorous as it seemed. He had been thrust into a world of politics, power, and ancient secrets, and it was only a matter of time before the consequences of his strange victory caught up to him. Lady Verla had made it clear that she didn't want anything to do with him. She was gracious in her royal duties, but her eyes never softened towards Adrian. He had been nothing but a pawn in a game he didn't understand, and she was not about to welcome him with open arms. Every time their paths crossed, she would glance at him with contempt. It wasn't that she hated him, it was that she hated what he represented. An outsider, a reminder of a game she had no interest in playing. The first few days after the competition were the hardest. Adrian was kept in a grand palace, surrounded by everything he could ever need, except peace. He had no idea what was going on or why things had become so complicated. The palace was enormous, filled with strange beings from all over the galaxy. Verax royalty walked the halls with an air of superiority, and Adrian felt like an intruder in a world that wasn't his. He had expected some sort of grand celebration after winning the competition. Instead, it was as if no one cared. The Verax viewed him with disdain, as though they were all waiting for the moment when he would fail or reveal himself to be a weak human who wasn't worthy of their attention. Lady Verla's daughter, Arya, was a rare exception. Despite the coldness of her mother and the overwhelming nature of her surroundings, Arya was different. She was a small, delicate child, barely 5 years old, with long, golden hair that shone like the sun. Her large, violet eyes were wide with curiosity, and there was a certain innocence about her that Adrian found endearing. The first time he met her, he hadn't been expecting much. But when Arya looked up at him, her gaze filled with wonder, something inside Adrian shifted. Unlike her mother, who seemed to look right through him, Arya looked at him as if he was someone worth knowing. She didn't see him as a strange human, she saw him as a person. Adrian couldn't help but smile when she flashed him a shy grin. She was unlike anything he had seen before. She wasn't the typical alien child with a fierce or distant attitude. She was curious, asking Adrian countless questions, her voice light and filled with joy. Every day she would find him, asking him to play with her, to show her how things worked on Earth. It was strange, but Adrian quickly found himself looking forward to their conversations. She made him feel human again, as though the strange, cold world around him didn't matter as much. However, Adrian quickly realized that there was more to Arya than just her innocence. He had heard rumors in hushed voices, whispers from the palace staff and guards, that Arya was different. She was special in a way that no one could explain. There were stories about her being able to manipulate objects with her mind, about strange occurrences that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Adrian had dismissed these rumors at first, chalking them up to superstition and gossip. But as the days went on, he began to notice things. The way Arya would play with her toys and accidentally make them float. The way she would speak to people, and they would respond to her as if her words held more weight than any child's should. One evening, Adrian was walking through the gardens when he saw Arya sitting alone, her small hands clutching a glowing orb. It was strange, something he had never seen before, and it hummed with an energy he couldn't quite place. She was staring at it, her face filled with concentration. Adrian, curious and cautious, stepped closer. "Arya," he called softly. "What is that?" The little girl turned her head slowly, her violet eyes locking onto his. For a moment there was no recognition in her gaze, just an intense focus as though she was deep in thought. Then, with a sudden movement, she released the orb, and it floated in the air for a moment before gently landing on the ground. "It's my secret," she whispered, almost as if she was afraid to speak too loudly. "It helps me find the truth." Adrian felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't understand what was happening, but he felt certain that there was more to Arya's abilities than anyone was willing to admit. And if the rumors were true, Arya wasn't just special. She was a key to something much bigger. As Adrian spent more time with Arya, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. He noticed the guards lingering in the background, their eyes never straying too far from her. And there were murmurs in the hallways, whispers of someone wanting to use Arya's gifts for their own gain. One evening, Adrian finally caught Verla alone in the palace corridors. She had been distant for days, and he had no idea what she was thinking. He had hoped for some clarity, a chance to talk about what was happening in the palace, but as soon as he saw her, he realized that was not going to happen. Verla's eyes narrowed when she saw him. "What do you want?" she asked coldly, her tone betraying no emotion. "I just wanted to talk," Adrian said, his voice steady despite the tension. "About Arya, there's something about her, something strange." Verla sighed deeply, her eyes darkening with concern. "You don't understand," she said, her voice low. "Arya is the key to everything. She is the future of the Verax Empire, whether they realize it or not." Adrian felt a shiver run down his spine. "What do you mean? What is she really capable of?" Verla's gaze softened for a brief moment, and for the first time, Adrian saw a hint of fear in her eyes. "It's not just her powers. There are people who want to use her, people who see her as a weapon. I can't let that happen." Adrian's mind raced. He knew that there was something dark hidden within the palace, something sinister, but he had no idea what it was or how to stop it. He only knew one thing: if Arya was in danger, he had to protect her. "I'll help you," he said, his voice firm. "Whatever it takes, I'll protect her." Verla looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "You don't understand, Adrian. This is bigger than you, bigger than both of us. The people who are after her won't stop until they have what they want, and they will destroy anyone who stands in their way." Adrian nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He had no idea what he was getting into, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't turn his back on Arya now. She had already trusted him, and he wouldn't let her down. The Empire, the palace, the royal family, none of that mattered to Adrian anymore. All that mattered was Arya and the secrets she held. Whatever dangers lay ahead, Adrian knew he would face them head-on. Because, in this galaxy full of aliens and power-hungry beings, the only thing that truly made him stronger than any of them was his humanity. And that was something no one could take from him. Adrian sat on the balcony of the palace, staring out at the vast alien city below. The skyline was unlike anything he had seen on Earth, spires of shimmering metal twisted into impossible shapes, glowing with energy and life. Alien ships floated through the sky, their designs sleek and futuristic. It was beautiful in its own way, but Adrian couldn't help but feel like an outsider. This wasn't his world. His world was back on Earth, where the problems were simpler and the answers easier to find. But now he was here, in the heart of the Verax Empire, caught up in something far bigger than himself. He had no choice but to adapt. No choice but to fight. The stakes had grown higher in the days since his conversation with Lady Verla. Arya's powers were undeniable, and now it was clear that she wasn't just a precious daughter of the royal family. She was a key to the future of the galaxy. But there were dark forces at work, people who saw Arya's abilities as a tool to gain control, and they were willing to do anything to get what they wanted. Adrian wasn't sure who they were or how they would strike, but he knew one thing: he had to protect her at all costs. That was why he had come to the palace in the first place. It wasn't for the royal title or the fame of winning the competition. He never wanted to be a part of this alien world. But when it came to Arya, Adrian felt a deep, unshakable sense of responsibility. She had trusted him, even in the smallest ways, and that trust meant everything. It was something he couldn't ignore. The sound of footsteps behind him interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Verla walking toward him, her face a mixture of exhaustion and determination. She had always seemed so distant, but now there was something different about her, something fragile. Adrian had never seen her like this before. "I need to speak with you," Verla said, her voice low, almost hesitant. Adrian nodded, motioning for her to sit beside him. The palace gardens stretched out below them, lush and vibrant with alien plants he didn't recognize. But his thoughts were miles away from the beauty of it all. They were focused on Arya and the dangers she faced. "I'm listening," Adrian said. Verla hesitated, her eyes darting across the courtyard as though she feared someone was watching. The paranoia that had been growing in the palace was evident in her every gesture. She spoke softly, as if the walls had ears. "There's a plot. A plan to take Arya from me." Her words hit Adrian like a sudden storm. "I didn't want to believe it at first, but I can no longer deny the truth." Adrian's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, who would want to take her?" Verla's gaze hardened. "There are factions within the Empire, powerful, wealthy families who will stop at nothing to control Arya. She is the key to ruling this galaxy. She holds power that none of them understand, but they all want it." Adrian leaned forward, his brow furrowing. He knew that Arya was special, but he hadn't realized the extent of her significance. "How does she know this? Does she understand what's happening?" Verla shook her head, her eyes sad. "She's only a child. She doesn't know yet, but she's already been targeted. And they'll come for her no matter what." Adrian felt a chill run through him. The urgency in Verla's voice was undeniable. There was no time to waste. He had to act now before Arya became a prisoner in her own home. "How can I help?" Adrian asked, his voice steady but filled with determination. He wasn't going to let anything happen to Arya, no matter the cost. Verla looked at him, the faintest trace of gratitude in her eyes. "You must keep her safe. They won't stop unless they have her in their hands. You're the only one who can protect her now." The weight of her words hung heavy between them. Adrian had no formal training in combat, no knowledge of royal politics or alien warfare. But he had something that none of the factions threatening Arya could understand: his humanity, his heart, his empathy, his drive to protect the innocent. These things would be his weapons. The following days were a blur of planning and preparation. Adrian had no idea how he was supposed to fight against an empire. He was a mechanic, not a soldier, but he was determined. Every morning, he would meet with Verla in secret, discussing what they knew of the enemy's movements and what strategies might work. They couldn't trust anyone within the palace walls. The conspiracy ran deeper than either of them had realized. The more they learned, the more terrifying the situation became. There were spies everywhere, listening for any sign of weakness. Adrian couldn't even trust the guards assigned to him. Every person in the palace seemed to have their own agenda, and Arya was the prize they all sought to claim. Adrian spent every moment with Arya, trying to make her feel as safe as possible. He played with her in the gardens, read her stories, and tried to keep her distracted from the danger looming over them. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but Adrian could see the confusion in her eyes. It wasn't just the danger she sensed, it was something deeper. Arya knew something wasn't right. She had always known more than people gave her credit for. One evening, while they were walking through the palace gardens, Adrian noticed something strange. Arya had stopped in front of a large, ornate door, one that he had never seen before. It was hidden in the corner of the garden, overgrown with vines and shrouded in shadow. There was a faint glow coming from beneath the door, as though something was waiting for them on the other side. Adrian hesitated. He had no idea what this door was or where it led, but Arya seemed drawn to it, as though it held the answers they needed. "What is it, Arya?" Adrian asked, crouching down beside her. She looked up at him, her violet eyes wide with uncertainty. "I don't know, it's calling me." Adrian's heart raced. He didn't know what to make of it, but there was something in Arya's expression that told him this wasn't a coincidence. Whatever was behind that door, it had something to do with the power she held. He couldn't ignore it. With a deep breath, he gently pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing through the garden. Beyond it was a narrow corridor, lined with ancient symbols and strange artifacts. At the end of the hall was a large chamber, bathed in an eerie, otherworldly light. As Adrian stepped inside, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. "This is where it all started," Arya whispered, her voice barely audible. Adrian looked around, his eyes scanning the room. It was filled with relics and objects that seemed to hum with energy. There were bookshelves filled with strange texts, and in the center of the room was a pedestal, glowing softly with an unknown power. As they approached the pedestal, Adrian saw a large crystal at its center, pulsating with light. It was clear that this was no ordinary object. It was something ancient, something powerful, something that Arya was connected to. Without thinking, Adrian reached out to touch the crystal. As soon as his fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through his body. It was like nothing he had ever experienced before, flooded with visions, emotions, and sensations. He saw flashes of the future, images of battles fought and won, of the galaxy's future hanging in the balance. He saw Arya not as a child, but as a force that could shape the very fabric of the universe. The visions faded as quickly as they had come, and Adrian stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked down at Arya, who stood silently beside him, her face unreadable. "I understand now," Adrian whispered. "You're not just a key to the future, you are the future." Arya nodded, her expression serious. "I've always known." Adrian took a deep breath, the weight of his responsibility settling over him. This was it. This was the turning point. He had to protect Arya, not just from the political forces within the Empire, but from the dark power that was trying to control her. They weren't just running from enemies anymore. They were running from fate itself. But Adrian knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anyone take Arya from him, no matter what. As he looked at the crystal one last time, Adrian made a vow. He would fight. He would protect. And he would win. Adrian could feel the weight of the crystal's power lingering on his fingertips as he stepped back from the pedestal. His heart pounded in his chest, and his breath came in quick, shallow gasps. What had just happened? The visions were still fresh in his mind, the flashes of battle, the faces of people he had never met, the distant sounds of ships soaring through the stars. It was as though he had glimpsed the future, a future in which Arya played a pivotal role. Arya, standing beside him, seemed unfazed by the experience. She had been the one to lead him to the room, after all. It was clear that she understood this place and its power far better than Adrian could comprehend. But one thing was certain, there was no going back. They were no longer just running from political enemies. They were running from something far more dangerous, forces that sought to control the very destiny of the galaxy, and they were coming for Arya. As Adrian glanced down at the small girl by his side, he saw a quiet strength in her eyes. She wasn't afraid. She knew, just as he had come to realize, that the power she held inside her was not something to be hidden away. It was something to be protected and wielded. And yet, despite her calm demeanor, Adrian could feel a sense of urgency building inside him. The danger they faced was real, and it was closing in fast. "I don't understand all of this," Adrian said, his voice low, "but we can't stay here. If they know about this room, about the crystal, they'll come for us, they'll come for you." Arya nodded, but she didn't look scared. Instead, she turned to face the crystal, her expression unreadable. "It's not just the crystal thereafter," she said softly. "It's me. I am the key to something much bigger I've always known." Adrian didn't need to ask what she meant. The power she held, the connection she had to the crystal, it was clear now. Arya wasn't just a child, she was a vessel for something much older, much more powerful. And if the wrong people got their hands on her, there was no telling what could happen. He had to protect her no matter what it took. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. We need to get out of here. We need to move. Stay close, Arya. They left the chamber, the door creaking as it closed behind them. As they made their way through the palace, Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The halls were eerily quiet, the only sound their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. But Adrian knew better than to trust the silence. The palace had eyes and ears everywhere, and he couldn't afford to make any mistakes. They had barely made it halfway down the hallway when they were stopped by two guards. Adrian's stomach tightened as he recognized the stern faces of the men. They were regulars, guards who had been stationed at the palace for years, and they had always looked at him with suspicion. Now their gazes were cold, calculating. "Where are you going?" one of the guards asked, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. Adrian's mind raced. He had to act fast. He couldn't afford to make a scene, not with Arya so close. He could feel her presence beside him, calm and unshaken, but he knew that if things escalated, they wouldn't have a chance. "We're just taking a walk," Adrian said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet authority he hadn't known he had. "I wanted to show Arya the garden. She's been cooped up inside all day." The guard raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "You're not allowed to leave this area without permission," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Adrian took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "I have permission. I'm her protector." "Now, if you'll excuse us." Before he could finish, one of the guards stepped forward, his hand reaching for the weapon at his side. Adrian's heart raced as he glanced at Arya. She hadn't moved. She was watching the guards with a strange intensity, as if she could see right through them. The guard's hand froze mid-motion, his face going pale. You're not supposed to be here," he stammered. Adrian seized the moment, grabbing Arya's hand and pulling her along. "Let's go, Arya," he said, his voice firm. "We don't have time for this." Without another word, he turned and walked briskly down the hallway, keeping a tight grip on Arya's hand. He could hear the guards muttering behind him, but he didn't dare look back. Every instinct told him to move, to get out of the palace as quickly as possible. The danger was too great, and he couldn't afford to waste any more time. They reached the garden in silence. Adrian felt the tension in the air, the feeling that something was wrong. The gardens, once a peaceful escape, now felt like a trap. He glanced over his shoulder, but there was no sign of pursuit. For now, they were safe. Arya was unusually quiet as they walked through the lush greenery. Her eyes were distant, focused on something Adrian couldn't see. She had always been perceptive, but now she seemed to be more in tune with something else, something he couldn't understand. "Are you okay?" Adrian asked, his voice gentle. Arya nodded, though her gaze remained unfocused. "I'm fine," she said softly. "But they won't stop looking for us, not until they find me." Adrian's heart sank. He had feared as much. The people after Arya weren't just after a child, they were after the power she held. And if they were willing to go this far, to send guards after them so openly, then they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. "I won't let them take you," Adrian said, his voice filled with determination. Arya stopped walking and looked up at him, her violet eyes filled with something deeper, something that went beyond her years. "I know," she said softly, "but you can't protect me forever, Adrian. You can't stop what's coming." Adrian felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He wasn't prepared for this. He was just a mechanic, a man who had never asked for any of this. And yet here he was, standing in the midst of a war that had nothing to do with him. But it wasn't about him anymore, it was about Arya. She had become his responsibility, and he wasn't going to fail her. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice steady. We can't let them win." Arya didn't respond, she just stared at him, her gaze unwavering. Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something he didn't. There was a deeper truth behind her words, a truth he wasn't yet ready to face. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps broke the silence. Adrian turned sharply, his hand instinctively reaching for the blaster at his side. But it wasn't a guard. It was Verla walking toward them with a look of urgency on her face. "We need to leave, now," Verla said, her voice low and urgent. They know where you are." Adrian's heart raced. "How?" Verla's eyes flickered with fear. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that we don't have much time. The palace is compromised. We have to go now before they send more guards." Adrian turned to Arya, his expression firm. "We're leaving," he said, taking her hand again. "You're coming with me. We're getting you to safety." Verla nodded, and the three of them began to move swiftly through the garden toward a hidden exit that Verla had prepared. Adrian's mind raced. They couldn't stay in the palace any longer. They had to get out, and they had to do it fast. The path through the garden seemed to stretch on forever, the walls of the palace towering above them. But Adrian didn't dare slow down. He couldn't afford to. Every moment they spent in the open was a risk. As they reached the hidden exit, Adrian felt a sense of relief. They were almost free, almost safe. But he knew it wouldn't last long. The people after Arya were too powerful, too determined. They wouldn't stop until they had her. "Stay close," Adrian said, looking at Verla. "I'll get her to safety. We'll figure out what to do from there." Verla nodded grimly, but Adrian could see the worry in her eyes. They both knew that the hardest part was yet to come, but there was no turning back now. They had to keep moving forward, no matter what. The future of the galaxy depended on it.